Welcome to the second video of this Blender series where we're making a cloak and a wave traveling through a cloak warping around some object. In this video, we're just going to calculate a wave and visualize a wave on these three planes traveling in the plus X direction. So to do that, we're going to do this through the material shader. And first I'll show you the tip of the iceberg and then we'll dive deeper. But over on the right is this beach ball looking button. That's the materials button. And right now there's no material assigned to this. But if we click on new, now we have a new material. Let's name this something like, how about cloaked wave, something like that. And by default, this is the shader that it gives us. It's the principled BSDF. And if we click on that, there's a whole bunch of other options, but this is actually one we're going to use. And it just gives you some basic options for color and reflectivity and stuff like that. So looking at that, it's not immediately obvious how you turn that into a wave. And that's what I mean when I say this is the tip of the iceberg. Let's dive deeper and look at the rest of the iceberg. We're going to need a second window. So if we go up to the upper left here, notice how my cursor changes to a plus sign just in the very upper left. Pretty small region where it does that. Well, if I click the left mouse button, hold that mouse button and drag, I'm creating two windows. Two of the same windows right now, and that's fine. So I want to change what's in this window. I want to see my material shader or the nodes for that. So to do that, in this upper left, there's a little ball with a kind of a checkerboard grid underneath of that. Click there and select where it says Shader Editor. Now, these are the current nodes that are telling Blender what this looks like. And in order for Blender to really display this, how it is going to look, I have sort of just the CAD view right now. What I need to do is click on the not the rendered view, but the material shader view. And that's the easiest way to see the waves that we're about to calculate. And we will need this window to be huge, just enough to see the wave. And we can bring it down here so we can see everything. But over on the right, when I said that was the tip of the iceberg, here we're just looking at the tip of the iceberg, but these are the nodes. And all of the things that we could just set over here with constant values have a little bubble over to the left. And it lets you do all of these things as a function of position. So we can make a wave simply by changing the color as a function of position. So let's go through how we're going to do that. The first thing we need to do is bring in our coordinates. These were the Cartesian coordinates we talked about in the introduction video. So in the upper left here, there's add. I'm going to click on add, and then I'm going to start typing texture, and I don't have to type the full coordinate. The texture coordinate option comes up. That's the node that we want. This is the node that's going to have our coordinates, and we can define coordinates differently. We're going to use the object nodes, but we could also define XYZ based on where the camera is or other things. But we want to put the waves on this object, so we're going to use the object coordinates. Another node will go up to us. We'll go to add and type mapping. And always in my node setup, I start with texture coordinate followed by mapping. And I'm going to click the mouse button on object and drag it up to the vector input. So my coordinates are now in this mapping node. And right now the mapping node is doing absolutely nothing. It's passing that out. But it gives me the option to offset things, rotate, scale things, and we will actually use this to change the direction of the wave. We can do all of our nodes just thinking as if the waves are going in the X direction, and then just simply by rotating it, we can change the direction of that, and we don't have to manually deal with like XYZ components of wave vectors and all that. So it makes it very easy, but right now we're doing nothing other than just passing the coordinates out. The next thing is we're going to want access to X, Y, and Z, and they're lumped together right now as a vector. So we're going to go back up to add and type separate. We don't need to, at SEP, I saw separate X, Y, Z, don't need to type the whole thing. And that's the node we'll use. And I will drag the vector output of the mapping node to the vector input of the separate X, Y, Z. Now we have the Cartesian coordinates. And for calculating a wave going in the X direction, We just need X. So we have a wave, and it's going to have a wavelength. How do we set that? Well, one way we can do it is with a value node. So again, click on Add and type value and hit Enter. And this is where we can define our wavelength. Right now it just says value. And if we click on that, and over here under label, I can type in wavelength. And now it's labeled wavelength, so I can remember that. And I use that little trick a lot, especially when I do calculations. Sometimes I'll make the label the calculation I've just done so I can remember that. For right now, let's set wavelength to something like 0.2. After the wavelength, we will want the wave number, K. So we're going to need a math node. So I'll click on Add and type math, and up pops a math node. And I'm going to select this to divide. There's a whole bunch of different math things it can do, but divide is what I'm interested in. And I'm going to click on this first value and type 2 times pi. So 2 pi will be the value there. Then I'm going to drag my wavelength to the bottom input. And so what this is doing is calculating 2 pi divided by wavelength, which will be wave number. So if I wanted to, I could click on that divide, go over to the label and type in K, and now I'll remember, okay, that's the wave number. So my wave will be cosine of kx. So I need to multiply my x coordinate and this k. So let's go to add. We'll add another math node. And instead of add, we're going to multiply. So we're changing this math node to a multiply. And we're going to multiply the wave number times x. So that's just a kx. If I wanted to see what I'm doing here, I can drag the output of that multiply node over to base color. And sometimes it could be a small delay, and now we can see what's happening there. So x is going from some negative number up to some positive some number. And what Blender does, anything below 0, it displays as black. Anything from 0 to 1 will go from black to white. And then above 1, it starts to emit and look super bright. And that's what's going on here. Otherwise, it's pretty difficult to get actual numbers out of Blender, and you got to play around with colors and stuff to figure out what's going on. So that's just k times x. We want cosine of k times x. So I'm going to click on this multiply node. Rather than go to add and add another math node, I'm going to do a Shift D. And instead of multiply, we want a cosine. This will work just as well with the sine. It makes no difference here. And then I can drag that up over top of that line, that connection, and notice how it changes color. So when I drop it, it will insert a cosine. And now I'm starting to see my wave. Well, at some point, I would like this to move, and it's not going to move right now. So I'll need to add or subtract phase to this. So let's just create a little bit of room. I'll click on that multiply node again and Shift D to duplicate. I will change this to subtract, although let's do add first, because sometimes I don't always remember whether I had to add or subtract phase for it to be forward propagating. So let's try add first. And we'll stick that in there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to this value and click on this right arrow. Just click with the left mouse button, hold it down, and then drag it. And as I'm increasing that number, my wave is going backwards, which I don't want. And so then I'll just change add to subtract. And now when I increase that number, the wave goes forward. And so very often I'll forget, or I won't know, or something, or I don't want to even think about it. I'll put an add node in, try it, and if it's going the wrong way, I put in a subtract node. Now what I'll do is I'll click on my wavelength node and Shift D to duplicate that, and I'll drop that right below my multiply node. But up in this label box here, rather than wavelength, let's call this phase. And I'll drag the phase to the lower input of the subtract node. And for now, I'll just set it to 0. But now I can use this node to control the phase. And we'll just keep it at 0 for now. So that is it. We have calculated a wave. We have the beginnings of animating it. And the short answer is we'll be making this keyframes later on to actually animate that, but we won't need to do that right now. So that is it. Whoops. Go ahead and save your Blender file. I haven't saved mine yet, so the dialog popped up. I just by habit hit Control S, which is a good thing to get into. So go ahead and save your Blender file, and I will see you in the next video.